Sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin in the most ordinary places. A lonely tarmac, a broken jet, a heart that quietly refuses to give up. This is the story of a single father, battered by life but unbroken, and a woman who had everything except the one thing she needed most. Their meeting wasn't chance. It was destiny, waiting patiently beneath a sky full of snow. If stories of hope, healing, and second chances speak to your heart, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Together, we can keep the spirit of true love and kindness alive, one beautiful story at a time. Now take a deep breath. Let's step into a story that just might stay with you long after the last word. The wind howled across the desolate tarmac, carrying with it shards of icy sleet that stung Tyler Morgan's face as he pushed open the battered door of the maintenance shed. His boots crunched over the frozen gravel, every step a fight against the biting Wyoming winter that showed no mercy even to the strongest. The sky above was a heavy slab of gray, threatening more snow before nightfall. Tyler adjusted the collar of his worn leather jacket and tightened the scarf Maggie had knitted for him last Christmas. He glanced back toward the shed, where a faint glow from a wood-burning stove fought against the creeping cold. Inside, his daughter was safe, warm, her tiny hands busy sketching airplanes on scraps of old newspaper. His world had shrunk to that shed, to Maggie, to the simple act of getting through one more day. Across the tarmac, chaos brewed. A sleek private jet, white and silver, gleaming even under the steel sky, sat awkwardly, its engine sputtering and coughing black smoke into the air. Ground crew members hurried back and forth, shouting over the wind. Two mechanics in neon jackets waved their arms frantically, their breath visible in the frozen air. Tyler narrowed his eyes. That jet wasn't just grounded, it was in trouble. He stepped closer, his instincts sharpening. One look at the way the right engine stuttered and whined, the frost forming along the seams of the fuel lines. And he knew. If they tried to power her up again without thawing the systems properly, the pressure could rupture a line, a spark, a fireball. No second chances. A woman stood apart from the others, tall and poised despite the wind lashing at her long black coat. Her hair, dark as midnight, whipped across her face as she argued with the head of ground control, her gloved hands gesturing sharply toward the jet. Tyler recognized her at once. Elena Devereux, one of the wealthiest women in America. Magazine covers, business news segments, whispered legends of billion-dollar deals forged and broken. She wasn't just rich, she was formidable, the kind of person who bent the world to her will. Today, though, she looked simply stranded. Tyler hesitated. It wasn't his business. He had enough troubles of his own. Repairs to the shed, heating oil running low, Maggie's school fees coming due in 2 weeks. And yet, he felt it, deep in his gut. If he didn't step forward, something terrible was going to happen. He started walking. "Sir, stay back!" one of the ground crew yelled as Tyler approached. He didn't slow down. He lifted a hand, calm and steady, the way he had when guiding scared soldiers to safety in a war zone long ago. "I can fix it," Tyler said simply. The man scoffed. "You? We called in specialists. They're refusing. It's too dangerous. One wrong move and—" He jerked a thumb toward the sky, mimicking an explosion. Elena turned at the commotion, her eyes, sharp, calculating, locked onto Tyler. For a long moment she said nothing, simply studying the man before her. The lined face, the weathered hands, the battered jacket patched more times than she could count. She should have dismissed him. She almost did. But something, perhaps the quiet certainty in his voice, perhaps the way he stood there, utterly unshaken by the storm, gave her pause. "You're not with the airport crew," she said, Voice clipped but curious. "No, ma'am," Tyler said. "But I know engines. I know pressure systems in weather like this. And I know that if you try to restart that jet without clearing the fuel lines, you'll lose the whole plane. And maybe lives." The wind shrieked, pulling at his words. Elena hesitated, her mind racing. Liability, risk, reputation. Then she looked at the jet. Her ticket home, her empire, her carefully controlled life, and saw it trembling, gasping for breath like a wounded bird. "You're certain?" she asked. "As certain as I am that standing here arguing won't make it safer," Tyler replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. For the first time in years, Elena felt herself surrender to something that wasn't logic or calculation. It was instinct. An instinct said, "Trust him." She gave a terse nod. "Do it." Tyler nodded back once, briskly, like a soldier receiving orders. He hurried toward the jet, stripping off his gloves to better feel the vibrations through the fuselage. Every movement was deliberate, precise. He ran his fingers over the frost-laden panels, tapped gently along the fuel lines, listened with his ear pressed against the engine casing. Inside him, memory sparked. The hum of helicopter blades over the desert, the acrid smell of burning rubber, the desperate prayer of a man who had seen too much and survived. You don't fix machines by fighting them. You fix them by listening, by understanding. He worked fast, improvising with what little equipment the crew had left behind. A portable heat source, a set of aged thermal blankets, a jerry-rigged flow regulator cobbled together from spare parts. The storm raged on, trying to freeze his fingers solid, but Tyler didn't stop. Not when the tools slipped from his numb hands. Not when the ground crew muttered and shook their heads. Not even when Elena's voice, tight with fear, called across the tarmac. "Is it too late?" He simply looked up, meeting her eyes across the storm, and said, "Not yet." And with one final adjustment, the engine whirred to life, smooth and even, no sputter, no black smoke. Just a steady, strong purr, like a heartbeat rediscovered. A collective gasp rose from the crew. Tyler stepped back, letting out a long, frosted breath. Across the distance, Elena's hand lifted to her chest. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath too. He had done it. He had saved her jet. He had saved something she hadn't even realized she still believed in. Hope. The air on the tarmac shifted. A strange, heavy silence settling in the wake of the engine's steady hum. Tyler stood there a moment longer, feeling the vibration through the soles of his boots, assuring himself that the danger had truly passed. Only then did he wipe the frost from his eyebrows and step away, muscles stiff from tension. Across the tarmac, Elena Devereaux watched him with an expression Tyler couldn't quite read. Relief, certainly, but something else too. A flicker of curiosity, or perhaps gratitude. It was hard to tell with people like her, those who spent their lives behind polished armor, mastering the art of never needing anyone. The airport director came rushing out from the terminal, bundled in a coat too thin for the Wyoming winter. "Who authorized this?" he barked, glaring at Tyler. Elena turned sharply, her voice slicing through the freezing air. "I did." The director faltered, mouth half open. He wasn't used to being challenged, let alone by someone of Elena's stature. "Ms. Devereaux, with all due respect, you could have endangered—" "I am aware of the risks," she cut him off smoothly. "And I'm aware that if not for this man," she gestured toward Tyler, "your runway would be littered with the remains of my jet." There was no room for argument. The director fumed silently, then stomped away, muttering into his radio. Tyler rubbed his hands together, trying to coax warmth back into his fingers. He didn't care about the politics of it all. He had done what needed to be done. End of story. He turned to leave, eager to get back to the shed, to Maggie and the fragile bubble of warmth they had built together. But then, "Wait!" Elena called after him. Tyler stopped, his shoulders stiffening. Slowly he turned back. Elena approached, each step precise despite the slick ice beneath her boots. Up close, Tyler could see that the cold had reddened her cheeks, made her eyes water slightly. It made her look human. "You didn't have to do that," she said. He shrugged. Someone had to. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Most people she dealt with wanted something. Money, favors, power. But Tyler Morgan stood there with snow in his hair, grease under his fingernails, and no expectation in his eyes at all. "What's your name?" she asked. "Tyler. Tyler Morgan." She held out a gloved hand. "Elena Devereaux." Tyler hesitated just long enough for her to notice, then shook her hand briefly, his grip firm but not forceful. "Well, Tyler Morgan," Elena said, a wry note in her voice. "You've managed to save a Billionaire'S jet in the middle of a blizzard. That's not something most people can claim." Tyler gave a small, lopsided smile. "Guess I'm not most people." Elena laughed, a short, genuine sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. For a fleeting second, the walls between them cracked. But then the moment passed, and Elena's phone buzzed sharply from her pocket. She glanced at it, her face shuddering back into the cool, efficient mask she wore so well. "I have to leave," she said briskly. "The repairs, are they stable enough for takeoff?" Tyler nodded. "If you keep her running warm and take it easy on the climb, she'll be fine." She studied him again, that assessing gaze of hers. Tyler had the strange sense that she wasn't just evaluating the jet anymore, but him, weighing something behind those steel-gray eyes. Without another word, she turned and strode toward the jet, her team scrambling to ready the aircraft. Within minutes, the engines roared back to life, this time clean and strong. Tyler stood back, watching as the jet taxied toward the runway, the blinking lights of the control tower slicing through the gathering storm. A small voice tugged at his mind. Maggie, waiting for him, probably wondering why he hadn't returned yet. He turned to go, when a ground crewman jogged up, panting, holding out a heavy envelope. "From Ms. Devereaux," the man said. Puzzled, Tyler accepted it. Inside was a thick stack of crisp bills, thousands of dollars at least, and a handwritten note on expensive stationery. "For saving more than just a machine. Thank you. Elena Devereaux." Tyler stared at the envelope, a frown creasing his forehead. Money. It would pay for heating oil, new boots for Maggie, maybe even that math tutoring she'd been needing. And yet, something about it didn't sit right. He hadn't helped because of a reward. He had helped because it was the right thing to do. Tyler sighed, tucked the envelope under his arm, and made his way back toward the maintenance shed. As he crossed the tarmac, the first real snowflakes of the evening began to fall, soft and slow, dusting the broken world in white. Somewhere above the clouds, Elena's jet sliced through the storm, carrying with it the beginning of something Tyler couldn't yet name, something that felt suspiciously like destiny. The fire in the old cast-iron stove crackled and spat as Tyler sat in the dim warmth of the maintenance shed, the envelope from Elena Devereaux resting untouched on the cracked wooden table. Outside, the wind screamed across the empty runway, rattling the window panes like the hands of a restless ghost. The storm hadn't eased. If anything, it had grown more vicious, painting the world in layers of white. Across the room, Maggie sat cross-legged on the floor, her crayons scattered around her like petals. She was drawing airplanes again, rows and rows of them, some with smiling faces, some with wings like angels. Tyler watched her, a tightness in his chest he hadn't named in years squeezing a little tighter. She was his whole world, his reason for every early morning, every frozen day, every lonely night. "Daddy?" Maggie asked, not looking up. "Did you save the lady's plane?" Tyler smiled faintly. "I guess I did." She grinned, missing her 2 front teeth, and colored a sun over one of the planes. "You're a hero." The word hit him harder than it should have. Hero. Once, maybe. In another life. Now? Now he was just a man patching things together. Engines, broken dreams, himself. He leaned back in his chair, the springs groaning in protest. The envelope sat there, heavy with possibility. A month ago he might have taken it without a second thought. He needed the money. God knew he did, but something about it gnawed at him. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate the gesture. It was that accepting it felt like cheapening the reason he had stepped into that storm in the first place. Before he could think too much more about it, the door banged open, letting in a blast of frigid air and the thick figure of Jed Simmons, the airport's maintenance supervisor. "Tyler!" Jed barked, stomping the snow from his boots. "You're a damn fool." Tyler raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Jed peeled off his gloves, face flushed from the cold. "You could have been killed out there. You know that?" "I knew the risks," Tyler said evenly. "You think knowing makes it better?" Jed snapped. "This ain't Iraq, son. You don't have to throw yourself on every grenade you see." The mention of Iraq, a place Tyler had buried deep, landed like a stone between them. He kept his voice calm. Someone had to act. It was either that or watch that jet blow sky high. Jed huffed, pulling up a chair and sinking into it with a grunt. "You should have called it in, waited for the city crew." There wasn't time. They sat there, the old stove crackling between them, as the blizzard rattled against the walls. Finally, Jed leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "Look, Tyler, you got guts. I'll give you that. Maybe too much. But people like Devereaux," he shook his head, "they don't live in the same world we do. Today she hands you an envelope. Tomorrow she forgets your name." Tyler said nothing. He already knew Jed was right, or at least partly right. He hadn't expected anything from Elena Devereaux. And yet, the way she had looked at him before leaving, not with pity, not with disdain, but with something close to respect, had stirred an old, half-forgotten feeling inside him. Hope. Dangerous, stubborn hope. Jed stood up, pulling his gloves back on. "Think about it, Tyler. You got a kid to raise. You can't afford to be reckless anymore." The door slammed shut behind him, leaving Tyler alone with Maggie and the howling wind. The next morning, the world was buried under 2 feet of fresh snow. The storm had finally blown itself out, leaving behind a brittle, blinding silence. Tyler shoveled a path from the shed to the main terminal, Maggie trailing behind him like a bundled-up duckling. Inside the terminal, life was slowly returning. A few stranded passengers clustered near the cafe, sipping weak coffee from styrofoam cups. The smell of burnt bacon filled the air. Tyler made his way to the bulletin board, checking the postings for any maintenance jobs, anything that would put food on the table. But there was nothing. No flights scheduled, no deliveries, no charters. The storm had canceled everything. He exhaled slowly, fighting the familiar knot of worry tightening in his gut. Maggie tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, look." She pointed to the far end of the terminal, where a figure stood out like a snow lily blooming through the ice. Elena Devereaux. She wasn't wearing her high-powered city clothes today. No designer heels or perfectly tailored coat. Just jeans, boots, and a thick gray sweater that somehow made her look even more striking. Ordinary, accessible, real. She saw him and smiled, Not the polite, guarded smile of a billionaire acknowledging a service worker, but something softer, warmer. Tyler approached cautiously, Maggie clutching his hand. "Ms. Devereux," he said. "Eleanor," she corrected. He nodded, uncertain. "I thought you'd be halfway to New York by now," he said. She shrugged an almost sheepish gesture. "There's been a change of plans." Maggie peered up at her, wide-eyed. "Are you lost?" Eleanor laughed, and the sound was bright enough to make several heads turn. "In a way," she said, crouching down to Maggie's level. "Maybe I'm trying to find something instead." Maggie considered this gravely, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. Tyler watched them, a strange ache blooming in his chest. He had been alone for so long he had almost forgotten what it felt like. This simple, easy connection. Eleanor stood, brushing snow from her sleeves. "I was hoping," she said, her gaze steady, "that you might show me around a little. I have some time before the next flight out." Tyler hesitated. Work, bills, practicalities clamored in the back of his mind. But then he looked at Maggie's hopeful face, and he heard Jed's voice again, gruff but well-meaning. "You can't afford to be reckless anymore." Maybe, but maybe, some risks were worth taking. Tyler offered his arm, a gentleman's gesture from a life he thought he'd left behind. "Come on," he said. "Let's show you the heart of Wyoming." And as they stepped out into the crisp, sunlit morning, Tyler Morgan took the first real step toward a future he never dared to imagine. The sun had broken through the heavy clouds, casting long golden beams across the snowy landscape. It was the kind of morning that felt almost like a reward for surviving the storm. A brief, fragile beauty that wouldn't last, but that needed to be appreciated all the same. Tyler led Elena and Maggie across the snowy tarmac, the three of them crunching through fresh drifts of snow toward the open fields beyond the airport. They stopped at a ridge where the world seemed to fall away into endless white valleys and distant blue mountains. Tyler knelt and packed a snowball in his hands, tossing it lightly to Maggie, who squealed and ducked behind Elena. Elena laughed, a real laugh, light and full, and Maggie immediately took that as permission to lob her own snowball at Tyler. It smacked him square in the chest, sending powder flying. "Ambush!" Tyler cried, mock staggering backward. Maggie whooped with delight. And Elena. She smiled in a way that made Tyler's heart lurch painfully in his chest. It was a smile that said she had forgotten, just for a moment, about billion-dollar deals, shareholder meetings, and lonely penthouse suites. For a few minutes they weren't a billionaire, a mechanic, and a little girl. They were simply people, connected by nothing but laughter and the pure, unexpected warmth of a winter's morning. Later they sat together at the tiny cafe inside the terminal, warming their hands around chipped ceramic mugs. The smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls filled the space, battling the last vestiges of the storm still lingering outside. Tyler stirred his coffee absently. "So," he said, glancing at Elena, "change of plans?" She sipped her tea before answering. "The storm rerouted my business meetings. They can wait." Tyler raised an eyebrow. "Must be nice to have the kind of life where you can just delay billion-dollar deals." Elena gave a small, wry smile. "It's not always what it seems. Most of the time, I don't control my schedule. It controls me." There was a weariness in her voice that Tyler hadn't heard before. Maggie piped up between bites of her cinnamon roll. "Do you like your job?" Elena paused. An easy question, and yet the answer caught in her throat. "I like building things," she said slowly. "Creating something that didn't exist before, but sometimes it gets lonely." Maggie nodded solemnly, as if understanding something far beyond her years. My daddy says it's not the job that matters. It's who you come home to. Tyler froze, coffee halfway to his mouth. Elena turned toward him, her gaze softening. Smart man, she said quietly. Tyler shrugged, feeling oddly exposed, just trying to teach her the important stuff. There was a long pause, comfortable, but charged, as if both of them recognized the invisible bridge being built between them, plank by careful plank. After the cafe, Tyler offered to show Elena the old hangar at the far end of the airport. A relic from World War II, abandoned but still standing strong against the Wyoming winds. They trudged through the snow, Maggie skipping ahead, leaving a trail of tiny boot prints. The hangar was a massive skeleton of rusted metal and cracked concrete. Inside, the air was cold and still. Light streamed through holes in the roof, illuminating dust motes dancing like spirits. Elena ran a hand along the fuselage of an ancient trainer plane, her fingertips tracing the faded U.S. Air Force emblem. My grandfather fought in the war, she said. He used to tell me stories about these planes, how every dent, every scratch told a story of survival. Tyler nodded, understanding more than he could say. I flew helicopters in Iraq, he said quietly. You learn real fast that machines have a soul, not because they're alive, but because the people who trust them with their lives leave a piece of themselves behind. Elena turned to look at him fully now, really see him. Not just a mechanic, not just a struggling single dad, but a man who had carried burdens few could understand and had never stopped walking forward. You miss it? She asked. Tyler considered. I miss the men, the purpose, the feeling that what you did mattered. He hesitated, then added, but I don't miss what it cost. Elena looked down, her hand still resting on the plane. Nothing worth doing is ever free, she said. Their eyes met across the vast, hollow space of the hangar, and for a moment, the ghosts of their pasts, the wars fought, the battles lost, the lonely nights endured, seemed to whisper and swirl around them, weaving their stories together. As they walked back toward the terminal, Maggie bounded ahead again, her laughter echoing across the frozen landscape. Elena fell into step beside Tyler, their arms brushing briefly. You know, she said lightly, I think you're wrong. Tyler arched an eyebrow. About what? You said you're just trying to teach Maggie the important stuff. She smiled. I think you're living it. Tyler chuckled softly, kicking at a clump of snow. Maybe. Some days it feels like I'm just surviving. Elena's voice softened. Surviving is sometimes the bravest thing a person can do. They reached the terminal steps and Tyler paused, turning to face her. I'm glad you stayed, he said simply. Elena hesitated, her breath misting between them. So am I. And somewhere deep inside Tyler Morgan, the man who had given up on miracles, who had armored himself against disappointment, something fragile and fierce began to stir, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Real living, breathing hope. The afternoon sun slanted low over the mountains, washing the airport in a pale, honeyed light. Snow still blanketed the world, but the worst of the storm had passed, leaving a silence so pure it seemed almost sacred. Tyler closed the shed door behind them, shaking snow from his boots. Inside, the air was warm and close, filled with the comforting sense of burning wood, old leather, and something faintly sweet. Maggie's attempt at baking earlier that morning. Elena stepped inside cautiously, her polished world so far from this battered shelter that Tyler wondered for a moment what she must see. The cracked linoleum floors, the mismatched chairs, the battered wood stove ticking quietly in the corner. But if Elena was appalled, she gave no sign. Instead, she moved slowly around the room, her fingers brushing lightly over the scarred table. The faded curtains, the old photos thumbtacked to the walls, snapshots of another life, another man Tyler barely recognized. "This is cozy," Elena said, a smile tugging at her lips. Tyler chuckled under his breath. "That's a generous way to put it." Maggie raced ahead, kicking off her boots and tossing her pink scarf onto a hook. Then, with the ease of long habit, she hopped onto the rickety piano bench tucked into the far corner. The piano was ancient, a second-hand upright, its varnish worn thin and several keys stuck or missing altogether. Tyler had rescued it from a junk shop 2 years ago, more on hope than reason. Now Maggie patted the keys with childlike affection before launching into a tune. It was halting at first, a little out of rhythm, but the melody was unmistakable. "Somewhere over the rainbow." Elena froze. The first few notes filled the small space, fragile and trembling, yet filled with something deeper. Longing, perhaps, or that stubborn hope that refuses to die, even in the harshest storms. Tyler glanced at Elena, saw her stiffen slightly, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. He moved quietly to the stove, giving her space. Maggie played on, her small face scrunched in concentration, unaware of the impact her music was having. When she faltered at a tricky passage, she paused and looked up. "Daddy?" she called. "Help me?" Tyler crossed over, kneeling beside her, his big, rough hands guiding her small ones. "You're close, kiddo. Just feel it." Together, haltingly, they picked up the melody again. Elena watched, something inside her cracking open. She saw it all in that tiny, battered room, the resilience, the tenderness, the fierce love that had nothing to do with wealth or status. She felt it in the way Tyler's voice softened when he coached Maggie through the notes. She heard it in every imperfect, beautiful chord. Her throat tightened painfully. It had been years since she had let herself feel this exposed, years since she had believed in anything so unguarded. When the song ended, Maggie beamed. "I did it!" "You sure did," Tyler said, ruffling her hair. Maggie turned to Elena, grinning. "Do you want to try?" Elena opened her mouth to decline politely. Instinct, habit, the armor she always wore. But something in Maggie's eager face made her pause. Slowly, awkwardly, she crossed the room and sat beside Maggie on the narrow bench. The old piano creaked under the new weight. Maggie plunked a key. "Just one hand," she instructed seriously. Elena smiled despite herself and obediently pressed a single note. The sound was flat, sour. She winced. Maggie giggled. "It's okay. Daddy says it's not about playing perfect. It's about playing with heart." Elena glanced sideways at Tyler, who shrugged with a sheepish grin. "She listens better than most adults," he said. Encouraged, Elena tried again. This time she managed a few clumsy notes in succession, awkward but undeniably music. Maggie clapped her hands. "See? You're a natural." Elena laughed. A bright, startled sound that seemed to light up the room. Tyler leaned back against the table, arms crossed, simply watching them. Something old and cautious inside him stirred uneasily, but he ignored it. There was no room for fear today, only the fragile, breathtaking beauty of the moment. Later, after Maggie had curled up on the worn sofa with a book, Tyler poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to Elena. They stood together by the window, watching the snow fall gently outside. "This place," Elena said softly. "It's not much, but it feels more like home than any penthouse I've ever lived in." Tyler didn't know what to say to that, so he said the truth. "It's not about the walls," he said quietly. "It's about the people inside them." Elena turned her face toward him, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed down to just the two of them. No past, No future. Only the fragile thread pulling them together across the chasm of everything they had lost. "You're a good man, Tyler Morgan," she said. He chuckled, looking away. "That's up for debate." "I don't think it is." Outside, the last of the sunlight bled away, leaving the world wrapped in a blue-gray hush. Inside the little shed, a battered piano stood silent witness to a miracle neither of them quite dared to name yet. The slow, aching return of faith in something they had both given up on long ago. Home, family, love. And somewhere over the rainbow, something beautiful waited just out of sight, waiting for the two souls brave enough to reach for it. The next morning dawned with a cold, brittle light, the sky a pale wash of blue above endless fields of snow. Tyler stirred the embers in the stove, the familiar ritual grounding him as the world slowly woke around him. Maggie slept curled up under a mountain of quilts, one small hand poking free to clutch a worn stuffed rabbit. Across the room, Elena sat at the kitchen table, cradling a chipped mug between her hands. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, only a thick wool sweater and jeans. But Tyler thought he had never seen anyone look more real, more painfully beautiful. He poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across to her. "Thanks," she said, her voice rough with sleep. They drank in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the distant rumble of snow sliding from the roof. Tyler didn't know who broke the silence first. Maybe it was both of them. Some unspoken agreement that the moment for small talk had passed. "You were military?" Elena asked quietly. Tyler nodded. "Army. Black Hawk pilot." Her eyes widened slightly. "I thought maybe you had that look." He smiled faintly. "The 1,000-yard stare?" "Something like that." He sipped his coffee, savoring the bitter heat. "It was a long time ago. Different life. But it's still part of you," she said, not as a question, but as a fact. He nodded again. "There are things you see, things you survive, that never really leave you," he said. "You just learn to carry them better." Elena set her mug down, her hands trembling slightly. "I know something about that," she said. Tyler glanced at her, surprised by the rawness in her voice. She didn't meet his eyes. Instead, she stared out the window, watching the snow fall in slow, lazy spirals. "My parents died when I was 9, she said. "Car crash. I was supposed to be with them that night, but I got sick. Stayed home with the nanny." She laughed, but it was a brittle, broken sound. "Everyone said how lucky I was, how blessed. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt abandoned, guilty, like I was the reason they were gone." Tyler said nothing, sensing that what she needed was not answers, but space to speak. "So I built walls," Elena continued. "Big, strong walls. I thought if I worked hard enough, became successful enough, I could outrun the loneliness." She turned to him then, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "But no matter how many companies I bought, how many buildings I put my name on, I was still that 9-year-old girl, staring out a window, waiting for parents who would never come home." The confession hung between them, raw and heavy. Tyler reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and placed his hand over hers. Her fingers curled around his instinctively, clinging like a lifeline. "I get it," he said softly. "Different story. Same kind of hurt." They sat like that for a long time, hands entwined, 2 wounded souls finding shelter in each other's presence. Later they took Maggie outside to build a snowman. The world was dazzling, blinding white under the midday sun. The laughter that echoed across the snowy fields was pure, uncomplicated, healing. Tyler helped Maggie roll the base of the snowman, while Elena scavenged for sticks and rocks. When they finished, the snowman stood lopsided and grinning, wearing one of Tyler's old fishing hats and a scarf Maggie insisted on lending it. Elena snapped a photo with her phone, her face flushed from the cold and laughter. "Perfect," she declared. Tyler chuckled. "He's definitely something." "He's family now," Maggie said firmly, planting her hands on her hips. Tyler exchanged a look with Elena, a look that said more than words ever could. Family. The word hung in the air between them, fragile and terrifying and beautiful. That evening, as Maggie dozed off beside the stove, Tyler and Elena sat by the window, sharing a blanket and watching the stars emerge, one by one in the vast Wyoming sky. "You ever think about leaving?" Elena asked, her voice a soft murmur against the silence. Tyler shrugged. "Sometimes, but this place, it's Maggie's home. It's where she remembers her mom." Elena nodded, understanding flickering across her face. "Do you ever think about starting over?" she asked. Tyler hesitated. "I used to," he said, "but it always felt selfish, like moving forward meant forgetting." Elena turned to face him fully. "It's not forgetting," she said. "It's honoring, carrying them with you into the life they would have wanted for you." He stared at her, the truth of her words sinking deep into places he had buried for too long. "I think," Elena continued, her voice trembling slightly, "the people who love us don't want us to stay frozen in grief. They want us to live, really live." Tyler swallowed hard, emotion burning the back of his throat. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop surviving. Maybe it was time to start living again. Slowly, cautiously, he reached for her hand under the blanket. Elena didn't hesitate. She twined her fingers with his, anchoring them both to the fragile, terrifying, beautiful hope blooming between them. Outside, the snow continued to fall, silent, steady, inevitable, a soft benediction on a world learning, slowly but surely, how to heal. The next day broke warmer, the sharp bite of the storm finally softening into something gentler. The snow no longer screamed against the windows. It simply drifted, lazy and slow, like a world at peace with itself. Inside the maintenance shed, Maggie buzzed with excitement. She dashed from the stove to the rickety table, setting out mismatched plates and chipped cups, with all the solemnity of a banquet organizer. Tyler watched from his seat by the stove, a fond smile tugging at his lips. It was Maggie's idea. A real dinner. She had insisted for their guest. And somehow Elena had agreed. He wasn't sure who was more surprised, him or Elena herself. Now the little room crackled with a strange, lovely energy, as if something important was about to happen, though no one quite dared say it aloud. Tyler moved to the stove, lifting the lid off the pot simmering there. The smell of homemade chicken stew filled the small space. Simple, hearty, the kind of meal meant to nourish more than just the body. He ladled generous portions into bowls, feeling oddly nervous. It wasn't just a meal. It was something more, something he hadn't offered to anyone outside of Maggie in years. When he set a bowl in front of Elena, she looked up at him with a smile so warm it nearly undid him. "Thank you," she said simply, and Tyler had to look away for a moment to gather himself. They ate together, laughter bubbling up easily as Maggie regaled Elena with wild tales of life at the airport. The time a moose wandered onto the runway, the blizzard that stranded a family of ducks inside the terminal. Elena listened with genuine interest, laughing in all the right places, asking questions that made Maggie puff up with pride. Tyler watched them from across the table, feeling something he hadn't felt in so long he almost didn't recognize it. contentment. Not the kind that came from comfort or security. He hadn't known much of either for years. But the deeper kind, the kind that came from being seen, being known, and still being loved. And after dinner, Maggie pulled out a battered board game from under the sofa and insisted they all play. Tyler groaned good-naturedly. "You know she cheats, right?" he warned Elena. "I do not!" Maggie cried indignantly, hands on her hips. Elena laughed and settled onto the floor beside Maggie, tucking her legs beneath her gracefully. "I think I'll take my chances." They played by the flickering light of the stove, the room filled with the low hum of voices, the occasional whoop of victory or groan of defeat. Tyler couldn't remember the last time he had laughed so much. The sound felt rusty in his throat, but it grew easier with each passing moment, as natural as breathing. When Maggie finally nodded off mid-game, her head drooping onto Elena's shoulder, a hush fell over the room. Tyler moved to lift her gently into his arms, cradling her close. She stirred but didn't wake, her small hand fisting in his shirt. He carried her to the sofa, covering her with a quilt, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead with infinite tenderness. When he turned back, Elena was watching him with an expression so open, so full of something he dared not name, that he almost staggered under the weight of it. They sat in the soft golden glow of the stove, Maggie breathing steadily in the background, and for a long time neither of them spoke. It was Elena who broke the silence, her voice low and unsteady. "You're a good father, Tyler." He shook his head, a bitter smile twisting his mouth. "I'm doing my best," he said. "Some days it feels like barely enough." "It's enough," she said firmly. Their eyes locked across the small, worn room. Two lives from different worlds, yet somehow finding the same fragile, sacred ground. Tyler cleared his throat, needing to say something, anything to steady himself. "You know," he said, forcing a chuckle, "this isn't exactly the Ritz." Elena smiled, slow and genuine. "No," she said, "it's better." The simplicity of her words knocked the air from his lungs, because he realized in that moment that she meant it, not out of pity, not out of charity, but because she saw something here, a kind of richness the world she came from had long ago forgotten. Family, love, hope, the things that couldn't be bought, only found, and only if you were brave enough to open your heart again. Tyler shifted, his hand brushing against hers by accident, or maybe not by accident at all. He should pull away. He should remember who she was, what she represented, the vast gulf between their lives. But he didn't. Instead, he let his hand rest lightly over hers, neither grasping nor retreating, just there. An unspoken invitation. A bridge, half-built, waiting for the next step. Elena didn't pull away. She turned her palm upward, threading her fingers through his. It was such a small thing, a whisper of contact, and yet it carried the weight of everything they had both survived. The losses, the loneliness, the stubborn hope that had refused to die inside them. Tyler closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and cinnamon, and something achingly sweet he couldn't quite name. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to believe. In second chances, in miracles, in the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't already lived the best part of his life. Maybe the best was still ahead, waiting for him, waiting for them. And in the soft, golden hush of that Wyoming night, with Maggie sleeping peacefully beside them, Tyler Morgan dared to hope once more. The next morning, the world lay draped in a dazzling coat of white. The storm, so fierce and unrelenting only days ago, was now nothing more than a memory. its fury washed away by sunlight and clear skies. Tyler stood on the porch of the maintenance shed, a cup of coffee warming his hands, his breath misting in the crisp air. He watched as Maggie raced ahead through the snow, her laughter rising like birdsong. And beyond her he saw Elena, walking slowly, her hands stuffed deep in her coat pockets, her head tilted back to gaze at the wide blue sky. It was a picture Tyler knew he wouldn't forget. A woman who had spent her life among glass towers and boardrooms, standing still, just breathing, as if she had finally remembered how. They spent the morning outside, repairing the old fence that marked the edge of the property. Maggie made a game of it, pretending they were settlers, fortifying a homestead against the wild. Elena joined in without hesitation, laughing as she struggled to hammer a nail into the stubborn, frozen wood. Tyler found himself laughing too, full, unguarded, the kind of laugh he hadn't heard from himself in years. It felt good. It felt right. But even as he lost himself in the easy rhythm of work and laughter, a small voice nagged at the back of his mind. This couldn't last. This wasn't real life. Elena belonged to another world, one of jets and boardrooms, power and prestige. He was just a man patching together a life for himself and his daughter, with grit and prayers. Sooner or later she would leave. She had to. That afternoon, Tyler found Elena standing alone near the edge of the airstrip, her hair whipping around her face in the winter breeze. He approached quietly, sensing the weight that hung around her like a shadow. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. When she finally turned to him, there was a sadness in her eyes he hadn't seen before. "I got a call this morning," she said, "from my assistant." Tyler braced himself. "They rescheduled my meetings, my jet's being prepped. I'm expected in New York by tomorrow morning." There it was, the truth he'd known deep down but hadn't wanted to face. He nodded, keeping his face neutral. "That's good," he said. "You have a lot waiting for you back there." Elena smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Do I?" she asked softly. Tyler didn't know what to say to that. He shoved his hands deep into his jacket pockets, feeling the familiar old defenses creeping back up. "Look," he said after a moment, whatever this has been, it's been good, real good. But you have a life back there. Maggie and I, we'll be fine." Even as he said it, the words tasted like ashes. Because the truth was, he didn't want her to go. Not just because of what she meant to him, but because of what she had stirred awake inside him. Hope, connection, the terrifying, exhilarating thought that maybe he wasn't meant to live the rest of his life in quiet isolation after all. Elena stepped closer, her boots crunching in the snow. "I don't want to leave," she said. Tyler met her gaze, searching for any sign of hesitation, any trace of pity. He found none, only sincerity, and something deeper, something that mirrored the ache in his own chest. "Then don't," he said, his voice low and rough. She smiled sadly. "It's not that simple, Tyler. I have responsibilities, people who depend on me." "I get it," he said. And he did. He would never ask her to give up her life. He respected her too much for that, but it didn't make it hurt any less. That night, they sat together by the stove while Maggie slept, neither one speaking much. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that said all the things they couldn't quite find words for. Tyler wanted to tell her how much she had changed him, how much lighter the world felt with her in it. He wanted to ask her to stay, to risk everything for a future neither of them could promise. But he didn't, because real love, the kind that mattered, wasn't about holding on too tight. It was about setting someone free, even if it broke your heart to do it. When the clock struck midnight, Elena rose from her seat. She crossed the room and stood over Maggie, who murmured something in her sleep and curled tighter into her quilt. Elena brushed a gentle hand over the girl's hair, her face crumpling for just a moment under the weight of all she was about to lose. Then she straightened, squaring her shoulders the way Tyler imagined she had 1,000 times. Before walking into boardrooms and battles he could barely imagine, she turned to Tyler, her voice steady but soft. "I'll be gone before sunrise," she said. Tyler nodded, feeling something splinter inside him. "Safe travels," he said. For a moment, she looked like she might say something more. But then she simply crossed the room, opened the door, and disappeared into the snowy night. Tyler sat there long after the door closed, the fire sinking into embers, the room growing colder by the minute. Outside, the sky was clear, 1,000,000 stars burning overhead, a reminder that even after the worst storms, the sky always cleared. But some storms, he thought, left damage no amount of sunshine could fix. Still he sat there, breathing in and out, holding on to the only thing he had left: hope. Because if there was one thing Tyler Morgan knew, deep down in the marrow of his bones, it was this: sometimes the ones who leave are the ones who come back when it matters most. The cold bit deep into Tyler's skin as he stood alone on the tarmac, the early morning darkness wrapping the world in a heavy, soundless shroud. The only light came from the hangar windows behind him, casting long shadows over the snow-blanketed ground. In the distance, the low hum of a jet engine stirred the stillness. She was leaving, really leaving. Tyler clenched his fists inside his coat pockets, the leather creaking under the strain. He had told himself he would be fine. He had convinced himself that letting her go was the right thing to do. But standing here, watching the silver shape of Elena's jet emerge from the mist, like some great bird preparing to take flight, Tyler felt something inside him unravel. Not anger, not even sorrow, just a deep, aching emptiness. He turned to leave, to retreat into the small, battered life he knew how to survive. And then, a voice, sharp and clear, cut through the frozen air. "Tyler!" He froze, his heart lurching painfully. Slowly he turned. There she was, Elena Devereaux, still in her traveling coat, hair whipping around her face, boots crunching over the packed snow as she ran toward him. She wasn't elegant or composed now. She wasn't the unshakable billionaire the world saw. She was just a woman, desperate, hopeful, running towards something she was terrified to lose. Tyler took a few staggering steps forward before meeting her halfway. They stopped, breathless, a few feet apart, the engine's distant roar like thunder beneath their feet. "I can't do it," Elena said, her voice breaking. "I can't get on that plane." Tyler's chest ached with the force of everything he couldn't say. "I'm not asking you to," he said roughly. Tears brimmed in Elena's eyes, shining under the dim lights. "I thought I had to choose," she said, her words tumbling out, "between the life I built and the life I want. But it's not a choice. Because without you—" She swallowed hard. "Without you and Maggie, none of it means anything." For a long, suspended moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, Elena pulled something from the pocket of her coat, a simple, thin silver ring. She dropped to one knee on the icy tarmac, the snow soaking into her jeans, her hands trembling. Tyler's breath caught in his throat. "Tyler Morgan," she said, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. "You saved my plane." "You saved my heart. You and your daughter saved my life in ways you'll never fully understand." She held out the ring, her hand shaking. "So I'm asking you," she said, her voice breaking into a whisper. "Will you marry me?" The world seemed to narrow to a single point. The snow swirling around them, the roar of the jet forgotten, the ache and loneliness of the past dissolving into the frozen air. Tyler stared at her. This woman who had everything the world said mattered, kneeling before him not in power but in love. Pure, terrifying, beautiful love. He sank to his knees before her, the cold biting through his jeans, the snow soaking into his skin, and with hands that trembled as much as hers, he reached out and closed her fingers over the ring. "Only if you promise," he said, his voice thick, "that this is forever." Elena laughed through her tears, the sound breaking free like a bird from a long-closed cage. "Forever," she whispered. Tyler pulled her into his arms, the ring clutched between them, and kissed her like a man drowning finding air for the first time. The cold didn't matter. The jet engines didn't matter. Only this, the heart pounding against his, the tears freezing between their cheeks, the impossible, staggering miracle of second chances. They stood slowly, arms wrapped around each other, Maggie's sleepy voice floating across the tarmac behind them. "Daddy?" Tyler turned to see his daughter blinking sleepily from the doorway of the maintenance shed, wrapped in a quilt, her hair wild from sleep. He smiled and held out a hand. "Come here, kiddo." Maggie stumbled across the snow toward them, yawning. Elena knelt to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes. "Sweetheart," Elena said softly, "would it be okay if I stayed? With you and your daddy?" Maggie considered this very seriously for a long moment. Then she threw her arms around Elena's neck. "I was hoping you would," she said. Elena laughed, hugging her back fiercely. Tyler watched them, his throat tightening until he could barely breathe. It wasn't just love he felt. It was gratitude. It was healing. It was the sudden, staggering awareness that sometimes, when you least expect it, life gives you back more than you ever dared hope for. Family, home, a future. The three of them stood there on the tarmac, framed by the rising sun, the sky ablaze with colors too beautiful for words. Above them, the last remnants of the storm drifted away, leaving behind a sky so clear it almost hurt to look at. Tyler closed his eyes for a moment, committing the scene to memory. The feel of Elena's hand in his, the weight of Maggie against his side, the fierce, aching wonder of a life not just survived, but truly lived. He had walked through storms. He had carried wounds too deep to name. But here, on this forgotten runway in the middle of nowhere, under the endless Wyoming sky, he found something he had long thought lost: hope, family, love. And this time, he wasn't going to let it go. The snow had begun to melt in earnest by the time the last legal papers were signed. In a small office at the edge of the town square, beneath a faded American flag and a set of cracked leather chairs, Tyler Morgan and Elena Devereaux became husband and wife. There were no chandeliers, no orchestras, no endless rows of faceless guests. Just Maggie in her best blue dress, beaming up at them. Just the county clerk, who wiped away a tear as she stamped the final document with an official thunk. And just Tyler and Elena, two people who had weathered the worst storms of life, and still somehow dared to believe in something more. They didn't return to penthouses or luxury resorts after the ceremony. Instead, they returned to the maintenance shed, home. Tyler had worried at first, about Elena fitting into his rough, patched-together world, about the vast, yawning difference between the lives they'd each known. But he had underestimated her. She shed her old life with a grace that astonished him, not abandoning it, but letting it rest in its rightful place. The past. She rolled up her sleeves, patched the roof alongside him, cooked simple meals with Maggie, laughed at the stubborn, fussy heater that always threatened to break down. She seemed to take joy in every cracked floorboard, every uneven shelf. "This place has heart," she said one evening as they sat by the stove, watching Maggie paint the old piano with bright, uneven splashes of color. "And heart is worth more than anything money can buy." Tyler didn't say much in response. He didn't have to. The way he looked at her said everything. The decision to start the flying school came almost by accident. One evening, after dinner, Maggie had climbed into Tyler's lap, chattering about how she wanted to fly someday. "Not in a big jet," she said. "I want to fly little planes, like birds." Elena had laughed and ruffled her hair. "You know," she said, a sparkle in her eyes, "I think a lot of kids would love to learn that, especially kids who might not otherwise get the chance." Tyler had frowned thoughtfully. "You mean start a school? Why not?" Elena shrugged. "We have the space. You have the skills. And there are grants for programs like this, especially for veterans teaching aviation." At first, the idea had seemed too big, too impossible, but day by day it took shape. They cleaned out the old hangar. Elena leveraged her connections to secure donations. Parts, old planes, sponsorships. Tyler built the curriculum, simple and honest, focused on heart as much as skill. They called it Wings of Destiny, because that's what it felt like. Not just a dream, not just a plan, but the inevitable, beautiful unfolding of something that had been waiting for them all along. The first students arrived in early spring. Kids from the town, kids from nearby reservations, kids who had lost parents, or hope, or both. They came with wide eyes and nervous smiles, stepping cautiously onto the old tarmac, as if they weren't sure whether to believe in this strange, wonderful place. And Tyler, once the man who thought he had nothing left to offer, found himself teaching them. Not just how to read a weather chart or operate a stick, but how to trust again, how to believe in themselves. He taught them the way he taught Maggie at the piano, not chasing perfection, chasing heart. One afternoon, as Tyler was tightening the wing bolts on an old Piper Cub, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Elena standing there, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She smiled, handing him one. "You know," she said, "when I was a little girl, I used to wish on the first star I saw at night." Tyler took a sip, the warmth sinking deep into his bones. "And what did you wish for?" "A home," she said simply. "Not a house. A home. People who would miss me when I was gone. People who would sit around a dinner table and laugh over nothing." Tyler reached out, brushing a wind-blown strand of hair from her face. "You found it," he said. She leaned into his touch, her eyes bright. "No," she whispered. "We built it." He kissed her forehead, lingering there as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of gold and violet. All around them, the world felt impossibly wide and impossibly close all at once. And for the first time in a long time, Tyler Morgan knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. That night, after Maggie had gone to bed, Tyler and Elena sat outside under the stars. The piano sat by the window, its keys freshly painted in bright colors, Maggie's tiny handprints forever stamped across the wood. Tyler picked up his old guitar, strumming a few soft, imperfect chords. Elena leaned against his shoulder, humming quietly along. Above them, the stars stretched endless and bright across the sky, a map of every step that had led them here, every wrong turn, every heartbreak, every impossible, stubborn hope. They sat there for a long time, wrapped in each other's warmth, the music of new beginnings weaving quietly between them. A year later, the air over the small Wyoming airfield buzzed with a sound that Tyler Morgan had come to love. the steady, rhythmic hum of small planes rising into the sky. The grand opening of the Wings of Destiny Flight School was modest by most standards. No red carpets, no flashing cameras, just rows of folding chairs filled with parents and wide-eyed kids. Just banners, hand-painted by Maggie and her friends, fluttering proudly in the spring breeze. Just the sound of laughter, hope, and second chances stitched invisibly into the fabric of the day. And that, Tyler thought, made it grander than any event he had ever seen. Standing at the edge of the runway, he watched as Maggie climbed into the cockpit of a two-seater trainer, her instructor checking the straps and controls beside her. She wore goggles too big for her face, and a grin even bigger. Tyler's heart twisted, but not from fear, from awe. His little girl, the tiny bundle he had once rocked through nights filled with grief, was now steering herself toward the wide open sky. He felt Elena's hand slip into his. "You okay?" she asked softly. He nodded, unable to trust his voice. Beside them, the mayor stepped up to a small podium, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, smiling warmly, "today isn't just the opening of a flight school. It's the beginning of a dream born not in boardrooms or budget meetings, but in the heart of a man who believed in second chances." Tyler felt his ears burn as the crowd turned toward him, clapping, smiling. He wasn't used to being seen this way. Not as a veteran, not as a struggling mechanic, but as something he hadn't dared believe he could be again. A builder of futures, a giver of hope. He squeezed Elena's hand tighter, feeling the grounding strength of her beside him. She had believed in him when he hadn't believed in himself. She had crossed an invisible, impossible line, from a world of billion-dollar empires to a battered maintenance shed, because she had seen something worth fighting for. And he had found the courage to let her in. After the speeches, the celebration spilled out across the tarmac. Families toured the old hangar, now transformed with colorful murals and polished planes. Children clambered into cockpits, their laughter ringing like music. At one corner, an old piano, freshly tuned and repainted in bright blues and yellows, stood waiting. Maggie, still wearing her goggles, raced over and plunked out a few notes, giggling when they came out a little crooked. Tyler and Elena exchanged a look, one filled with years of memories, losses, and the stubborn, beautiful triumph of not giving up. Elena knelt beside Maggie, her voice low but clear. "Play something, sweetheart." Maggie grinned and, with exaggerated seriousness, launched into Somewhere Over the Rainbow. The familiar halting melody floated across the airfield, blending with the hum of engines and the chatter of families. It was imperfect, playful, utterly human, and it was perfect. Tyler closed his eyes for a moment, letting it all wash over him. He thought about the storms he had walked through, the ones that had stripped him bare, that had taught him what really mattered. He thought about the nights he had held Maggie, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. He thought about the bitter cold morning when he had saved a billionaire's jet and unknowingly saved his own life in the process. And he thought about the woman beside him, strong, fierce, tender, who had taught him that it was okay to reach for joy again, that it was okay to build something new, even with hands still trembling from old wounds. As the song ended, the crowd erupted into applause, and Maggie beamed with pride. Tyler scooped her up, swinging her around until she squealed with laughter. Elena joined them, wrapping her arms around both of them, her laughter mingling with theirs under the wide Wyoming sky. They stood there for a long moment, the three of them, tangled together in love and hope, and the shining certainty that they had found something rare and unbreakable. Not perfection, not fairy tales, but family. Home, a life stitched together with threads of courage, kindness, and second chances. That night, after the last car pulled away and the last banner fluttered to a rest, Tyler and Elena sat outside the shed, watching the stars blink into existence overhead. Maggie slept inside, her dreams no doubt filled with open skies and faraway horizons. Tyler strummed his guitar softly, the notes floating into the cool night air. Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. "I never imagined," she whispered, "that happiness could be this simple." Tyler smiled, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Simple," he echoed, "but not easy." "No," she agreed, her voice thick with feeling, "but worth it." Above them, a shooting star streaked across the sky, brilliant and brief. Elena tilted her head back, her eyes shining. "Make a wish," she said. Tyler closed his eyes. But he didn't wish for anything, because for the first time in his life, he didn't need to. He already had everything he could ever want, right here, wrapped in the arms of a woman who had seen his broken pieces and chosen to stay, in the heartbeat of a daughter who had taught him to love without fear, under a sky so vast and forgiving it seemed to promise. The best journeys don't end. They begin again and again, with every brave, beautiful step forward. Thank you so much for sharing this story with us today. Before you go, we'd love to know, where are you listening from? It's a beautiful thing, seeing how stories like this weave across states, across countries, bringing hearts a little closer. If you enjoyed this journey, and if you'd like to hear more tales about hope, kindness, and the quiet miracles that shape our lives, we warmly invite you to subscribe to our channel. Your presence here means more than you know. It's what keeps this little circle of light growing stronger. Thank you truly for spending part of your day with us. Until we meet again, stay safe, stay kind, and remember, sometimes the smallest moments lead to the greatest stories. Until our next story, may your days be full of kindness, hope, and quiet miracles.